はい、こんにちは。テストです。今から日本語教室、英国 GCSE とアイルランドリーブンサート卒業証書。いいですか？いいですか？悪いですか？後では2004年度アイルランドリービングサート試験をお学びにします。どうぞよろしくお願いします。今日は Today we're going to start with lesson 1 and I will be speaking English to explain these things to you. It's just nice to warm up a bit. Today 第1課2025年1日3日金曜日。今日は金曜日でしょう。はい。Today we're going to be talking about Japanese.We're going to talk about Japanese in general. We're going to talk about the Japanese writing systems, Hiragana, Katakana, and Kanji. And that should take up all of our time. We have a lot to learn. And we may not be done with this lesson today, but we're going to start today. And we're going to see what we can say about Japanese. So we're both doing spoken and written Japanese.Usually when you do written Japanese, you're in the same room as the teacher. Unfortunately, we can't do that today, but I'm going to entrust upon you certain written exercises, and hopefully that will go well. But here we have an example of written Japanese, and it starts off with actually the word Japanese, Nihongo, written in kanji. And so actually, let's say on the left, we got Japanese.And then in hiragana, I've written Nihon-go, 4 syllables written, each one to its own. My head is in the way. That's not good. Video capture. That's better. Nihongo is written in kanji, Nihon-go. Hiragana is basically the curvy writing system. Uyaku, nichi, dekimasu. Should be able to see my pointer. I can get a filter to make my pointer more pronounced. Maybe for next week. But these are all written in hiragana. It's one of the 3 major Japanese writing systems, and it's the curvy one.Take a biscuit and go. Katakana, one of the 3 main Japanese writing systems, is not written here. I wrote katakana in hiragana, and that is a thing. And the kanji for katakana is written katakana. This is ka, and this is na. This is hira, and this is kata.The way you pronounce Japanese characters, kanji, changes all the time. But the way you pronounce either hiragana or katakana basically doesn't change. Kanji, which a lot of people already know about, who don't really even know Japanese, they know about kanji. Writing kanji in hiragana, ka-n-ji, and this is kan, and this is ji. And if you were speaking like English or Mandarin or Cantonese, you might call this han.Hans, but in Japanese you call it kanji. And here's some kanji, 2 kanji there. The katakana in this example, deto and dash. These are the katakana. These 2 are kanji. These 4 plus the little dot there probably considered hiragana. This is actually a period. 10, maybe just called, but it means the end of the sentence.Or Maru-ten, I believe it's called. So that is the rapid breakdown of Japanese. There's a lot of detail to fill in. It took me about 20 years of study before I could really say I was fluent in Japanese. It's been about 20 years since then, and a lot of things have slipped. But in terms of taking the leaving cert, I think I would do okay. Or taking the GCSE for Japanese, I think I would do okay.Let's go back and look at this slide based on what we've just learned.In the title here, we have actually 2 writing systems. The numbers are written in like Western So our alphabet are Roman letters, but our numbers actually come from Arabic. The Romans didn't write letters like this, but they did write more or less their ABCs the way we would write our ABCs, but their numbers they wrote in a very different way. These numbers actually come from like the Middle Ages or the Renaissance in Europe, which they had borrowed from Arabic, which they had probably borrowed from the Indians. But in this sentence, or in this headline here, we have a mix of kanji and like Western numerals. You know, I won't say Roman numerals. The alphabet's Roman, but the numbers aren't Roman. They're Arabic. But they're mixed in here. And I could have written these numbers with Chinese characters, and for Japanese people, they would both work. They would not be confused at all. If you have sometimes Western numbers and sometimes basically Chinese derived numbers, it's not confused. If you have an English word plopped into a middle of a Japanese sentence, most Japanese people, even if they don't really speak English, will know enough. The 26 letters of the English alphabet, they know those, and they can sound out a lot of English words without even really feeling like they speak English at all. No, I'm going to stop it. And then that is actually like lesson 0, but I'm going to go into the next part, hopefully have more for you. Okay, we're back to recording. So we've just had like our lesson 0 for the Japanese language. Next, I would like to talk about, make sure the focus is over here, Japanese. So the Japanese language, so the English language is like spoken all over the world. The French language is spoken all over the world. Spanish is spoken all over the world. More or less, Japanese is only spoken in Japan, except for in the past century and a half. Because Japan rapidly industrialized and events leading up to the Second World War, but it was more than just the Second World War. A lot of people throughout the Pacific speak Japanese like as a second or third language. More or less, the Japanese language is only indigenous to the islands of Japan. And even then, there are other languages within the islands of Japan. But in terms of like the official NHK level official Japanese that comes out of Tokyo, it's basically only for the islands of Japan, except for especially like an older generation who would have basically done commerce with Japanese people as much as like 150 years ago, and also young people who are interested in Japanese culture throughout the world, and especially throughout the Pacific. So you may find a lot of young Korean people who have a moderate level of Japanese, as well as a significant number of Japanese young people who have a moderate level of Korean because of their interest in Korean culture. And then maybe the boomer generation would be less so, but I was surprised at how much actually older Japanese people who were younger than the Second World War were actually interested in Korean culture. And, because Japan was such a major industrial, but also for cultural reasons, there are Korean people and there are Chinese people who are genuinely interested in Japanese culture. And so Western people are interested in like anime, or they might be interested in Japanese history. This is actually a reason to study Japanese. And over the years, there are increasingly more people outside of Japan who've never been to Japan who actually can speak, read, and write Japanese. So it is a major language, even if it's restricted to the Japanese islands. Or even if if you go to Singapore, if you go to Seoul, if you go to Manila, there's a chance you will find someone who speaks very good Japanese. When I was in Japan, they assumed that we were there because Japan was like the number 2 economy at the time, and we all wanted to get jobs as in a Japanese company, which is probably more true for me now than it was when I was a young person. But Japanese culture Japanese economy is a major force. And also science. People, if you get into computers, if you're into electronics, if you're into those kind of things, there's a lot of science being produced in the Japanese language that then has to be translated into other languages. So there are many reasons that a person would want to study Japanese. But unlike, say, English or French or more like German, but unlike English, French, Spanish, which are very internationalized languages, Japan is basically focused on the islands of Japan, and even that it's focused on Tokyo. You're going to get a different flavor of Japanese in Osaka, in Kyushu, in Akita than you would get in Tokyo, but the official, this is what Japanese is stamped by the government, comes out of Tokyo. So that's like a high level view of the Japanese language. You and most people already have an experience of the Japanese language. I'm not telling you about Japanese for the first time, but what I'm going to try and help you do with this series of tutorials is to have some technical knowledge about Japanese that helps you understand what they are really saying. And even in this day and age where more and more people understand the Japanese language, really like hearing the Japanese voice is what we really want. And then if you get really good, you can speak in Japanese, and that would be really cool. So the first building block of the Japanese writing system is hiragana. That's the thing that kids learn when they first go to school in Japan. It's the thing that when international students learn Japanese, it's the thing you learn first. I'm going to provide a worksheet with this email that basically you need to pick up a pen and you need to begin to imitate these letters. And it's very important the order in which the letters are drawn, because you're building a muscle memory that will actually affect the way you speak, read, and write the language later. So it's the building block is the hiragana, and it's very important that you do it correctly, that you draw the characters in the direction and the order that is indicated on the worksheet. Every Japanese person who really speaks Japanese will do it this way. If you don't do it this way, you will either have to relearn it later, or you will always be marked as someone who doesn't really speak Japanese. So please take this seriously. Please do it. Please pick up a pen and write these things. And write them whenever you want. Like when you're bored waiting in the doctor's office, pick up a piece of paper and write as many as you can remember, as many as you can pull out of your head. If you see a Japanese sign or a Chinese sign or any kind of, you can imitate it and write it once you know the basics of the order and the direction. And it begins here with hiragana. So I'm going to send you one worksheet to start writing on, but it's going to be a big part of our learning. You cannot learn Japanese without being able to write Japanese. It's just not going to happen. Japanese people actually write in the air to communicate to each other, but they also think it affects the way that they think about words, and it affects how they communicate. So when we learn Japanese, we write as well. And it goes all the way back to like the Han Dynasty. It's a really big deal. So with hiragana, and also with katakana, but especially with hiragana, one syllable equals one word. So if we look at the word hiragana, and the English word hiragana, if I divide it into syllables, I have the hi is a syllable, the ra is a syllable, the ga is a syllable, and the na is a syllable. It's not here, a, gan, a. It's hi, ra, ga, na. And basically every Japanese word is usually consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. Some of them are more consonants, sometimes they're more vowels, but the basic syllable is, if you translate it into like English, is one consonant and one vowel. And each of these characters represents a pair like that. I need to stop. I'm going to come back to basically reading through this list. Ready for the next part. Now, we're going to look at this list. And if you Google hiragana, you will see lots of versions of this table. This table is 5. For this orientation, we're going to say it's 5 rows. And the first row represents the vowel a, ah. We write it a, but it's ah. The second row represents the vowel e, which we would write with a letter I. The third row is u. The fourth row is e. And the final row is o. So Japanese vowels, and we're going to read on the far right column here, the far right column, a, e, u, e, o. That's the beginning. You begin, when you think in Japanese, you begin with a, I, U, E, O. The first consonant in the second column here is k. We would write it with the letter K. So reading top to bottom, ka, ki, ku, ke, ko. Next is sa. Sa, shi, su, se, so. Fourth column is ta. Ta, chi, tsu, te, to. Then na. Na, ni, nu, ne, no. Then ha. Ha, he, fu, he, ho. then ma. Ma, mi, mu, me, mo. Now, when we get to ya, in modern Japanese, we do not have a yi. We have ya, then we skip down to you, then we skip down to yo. So there are technically syllables that exist or would have existed a lot in old Japanese that in modern Japanese, they didn't make it through. So we see that in ya. Get back to da. We would write it with an R. If you really want to listen with your ear, it's like RDL squished into one. It is not reproducible in English or German or French as far as I know. You can say ra, like karate. You can say that, but Japanese people would say karate. And it's a thing. I've learned a bit of Vietnamese and they have no problem with this. They hear it and they can say it. So, and you know, maybe Cantonese, maybe Mandarin, but for Western speakers, we always force Japanese people to either say an L word or an R word. But for them, it's like RDL as one consonant. But here we find it, the column da, ri, ru, de, ro. And then the last one is like a miscellaneous. We only have wa at the top. We have o in the middle, which would be, in transliteration, would be actually written W-O, but we would say O. And then we have like at the end of a syllable, and you'll see lots of examples of that. This character, really never comes at the beginning. They do it in comic books, but they're just trying to, you know, be onomatopoeic. But in proper writing, here in the lower left-hand corner only comes at the end of a syllable. I may have said end of word. It's not end of word, it's end of syllable. So a syllable and then but that takes up a full syllabic beat. And I like to think of Japanese as actually being like beats. So when we say words, we can actually keep a rhythm to say them more properly than to say them with like an English cadence. Go to the next. The next slide is katakana. The katakana are a one-to-one match with the hiragana. So every hiragana syllable we have one katakana syllable like that. Let me put myself over here for a minute. Generally speaking, katakana are used to write foreign words. The Japanese language is always taking foreign words into itself, whether it be from English or Spanish or German or Dutch or Portuguese, or even like Chinese. The fact that Kanji came into the language, they also brought a lot of vocabulary into the language. And then in the modern era, bringing in vocabulary from Europe, they wrote those words in katakana, both to show that they're different, but also it's like the richness of the language. It's something they could do. So basically, once you learn how to pronounce properly in Japanese, you can take any foreign word and introduce it into Japanese. And as long as you write it with katakana, you've designated that you're not saying a native Japanese word. You're not writing a native Japanese word incorrectly. This is not a hard and fast rule. I've seen foreign words written in hiragana occasionally, but generally foreign words will be written in katakana. And I've also seen disputes in how words should be transliterated. It's kind of splitting hairs, but generally speaking, when you see katakana, it designates foreign derived words. When you see hiragana, it designates indigenous Japanese words. And when you see kanji, it designates vocabulary that came from Chinese. And there are exceptions to all of those rules. So here I've written katakana in hiragana, and then I've written it in kanji, and I have not written it in katakana. If I were to write katakana in katakana, it would be ka, ta, ka, na. You see that the katakana is more angular. When you are first learning to write, maybe I'll include both the katakana and the hiragana and ask you. When I was first learning to write, it was easier to write and memorize the katakana because of the straightness of them. It was easier for me to memorize them. Whereas the hiragana, I did work longer to get it. And then when you want to write well, it takes more effort to write in hiragana. But the hiragana is how Japanese children begin to learn Japanese. So we teach it first. You're going to have to learn both. You will not be fluent in Japanese or even pass GCSE or leaving cert if you don't really know these well. So have fun with it. Spend time doodling and drawing and incorporating it into your art. If you can enter them in on the computer, that would be great. We'll get to that later. But like if you can possibly change your Steam handle into Katakana, go for it. Or Hiragana. Let's go on to the next. Hold on just a second. What is the next slide? So here is a comparison of Hiragana and Katakana. And I still haven't written in Katakana yet. I should do that. Let's see. Shall we break the fourth wall? Nope, it's not going well. Yeah, we'll have to stop the presentation. So, with the boxes I drew, let me get myself out of the frame. I don't need to be here. I've taken these two tables from two different websites. And when you Google Hiragana and Katakana, you'll find loads of examples. But they will always have this basically it's a 5 by 10 structure, 50 basic syllables with exceptions. And those 50 syllables, which they actually say in Japanese, all the other more nuanced syllables are derived from these 50, as you will see. We're not going to get into the combination words where you take S-H-I or S-I and put it with another syllable to make another, put it with another vowel. You mix it with the Y's. And then the R-Y-A's, M-Y-A's, H-Y-A's, N-Y-A's, T-Y-A's? Yeah, we'll get to those. But for this first, we're just looking at the basic 50. And so this corresponds to this this E corresponds to this E, this U corresponds to this U, this E corresponds to this E, and this O corresponds to this O. Now when I actually do my little animation here, the tables are out of order, so the wa is more or less in the same place. This wa and this wa. See, I can go back. This wa and this wa, but the n is down here in the hiragana. It's lower left. Here it's upper left, and then the wo or o. They put it in the middle in this table, and they put it down to the lower left in this table. But all the other ones are in the exact same position. So da di do de do, da di do de do, ya you yo, ma mi mu me mo, ma mi mu me mo. And I'll use this point. I'm not going to, I don't have a slide for it, but people, well, actually it was my first slide. People make a big deal about Japanese being written right to left. And it is the lines in this is like standing form, tategaki. The lines occur right to left. First line, second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line, sixth line, seventh line, eighth line. But the characters go top to bottom. Nihongo no tategaki ni you yaku tai o 10. Sen 19年3月29日に日 Why do they say nichi twice? Update. 右の行のようにtate chuo, I would pronounce that as tate chuo. I could be wrong. I'd have to look it up to be sure. Ni mo taio. Tate hoko ni kaiten de teki o dekimasu. Dash. So the lines have moved from right to left, but the characters moved from top to bottom. If I were, and I actually think I really need to break the fourth wall here, in the slideshow. If I take this and I turn it 90 degrees, how do I grab this? I'll grab it here. 90 degrees counterclockwise. And I read this again. it would actually appear. Where's the pointer? Swap. It would appear as if I was reading left to right, and then the lines were going top to bottom. Nihongo no tategaki ni youyaku taiyo. 2019年3月23日にアップデート。右の行のように縦中央にも対応。縦方向に展開。回転。縦方向に回転で適用できます。Dash. I've turned it 90 degrees, and have I killed myself? I just don't want you to be full screen. That's all I'm really asking. There I am. I've turned this graphic 90 degrees counterclockwise, and it basically reads the same as we do in the West. So, if I were to take some other, what do I want to grab? Well, we'll do the last one. We'll go to the kanji one. So for kanji, this is written, the top of this graphic here is written in a Western style. Each line goes from left to right, and then we go lines, first line, then down, second line, then down. So the lines go top to bottom, but the characters go left to right. If I were to turn that 90 degrees clockwise, it would then match the tategaki old Japanese order. So if I take this and I turn it 90 degrees clockwise, I would read that 2023年 kotoshi no kanji. And that is when people talk about the Japanese reading right to left, the lines are left to right. The lines are right to left, but it's not that the characters are. Now, there was a time when they did do that, but it's basically before the war, and you almost never see anything like that. For modern Japanese that you're going to encounter on a daily basis, in fact, probably 90% of it is like the top blue box here. It's written in a Western style. The characters go left to right, and then the lines go top to bottom. And then the occasional sign or the occasional piece of art will be written like the actual calligraphy part here, where it goes, the lines go right to left, and then the characters go top to bottom. So when the monk is writing the character of the year, and then he's explaining it on the left-hand side there, that's like the tategaki form. And that left-hand line is the last line. But the sort of formal printed introduction of this entire affair, even though it's taking place at a temple, is written in essentially a Western word order. So that's kind of my favorite lecture to give in the world, and to show people if you turn it 90 degrees, boom, that's how it works. Because people have this misconception about how Japanese is actually read, and this is one of the big myths that it's very easy for me to dispel. Now, the kanji are basically loan words that were taken in from China. The first wave of them, I believe, came, this is where you have to remember dates, but let's say for argument's sake, the first wave of them came like 900 years ago, and the second wave of them came 700 years ago. They were two different Chinese dynasties, the Han dynasty and the Song dynasty, I'm pretty sure. And monks, the dynasty was flourishing. They would send out monks. The monks would settle in Japan, and they'd say, this is how you write Buddhist sutras. And Buddhist sutras were like the main vehicle for bringing Chinese vocabulary into the Japanese language. And only afterwards did it turn into like commercial goods or literature, Chinese poems, the annals of the ancient emperors. But the main thing that was bringing these Chinese characters into Japan were Buddhist monks who were creating communities of people who believed in their doctrine of Buddhism as opposed to that other guy, because he's wrong. And we can trace all of this historically as to when this vocabulary came into the Japanese language. Around the Second World War, both before and after, there were moves to like do away with Chinese characters because there's a lot of them and they're a bit cumbersome. But they're so embedded into the Japanese language that essentially the consensus now is you can't preserve the Japanese culture without preserving Chinese characters. And the Koreans, very, very interestingly, have a very different take on this whole thing. And they have an indigenous script that they use almost exclusively. You'll still find Chinese characters here and there, but much less so than Japan. But of course, the histories of Japan and Korea are very, very different. But you can go to Japan and communicate without reading kanji. I don't advise going to Japan and like trying to move around outside of Tokyo without learning hiragana and katakana and at least acknowledging that kanji are a thing. But you will need kanji when you like really correspond with Japanese people or if you really use it in the workplace. But it's also, like I say, it's a part of the culture that why would you elect to not understand a part of the culture if you were really studying the culture? That's my opinion. And as I say, I actually found it really fun to study. And I have to go. I have a call. Are we? Yeah, we have sound. So with respect to kanji, some other things I would like to say are that, so we've talked about the origin of kanji. Numbers will be written either in like Western numerals, like here we have 2025. Oh, actually, if you notice, Dai Ikka right here, this one is actually written in Chinese style, essentially. And then this one for Shogatsu, January, is written in Western style. So kanji are used, of course, in China. Hanzi. It is a lingua franca. It used to be used in Korean. You won't hardly see it now. Used to be used in Vietnam. You won't hardly see it now. I, especially growing up in Southern California, where there were a lot of refugees, like Vietnamese refugees, they might, if they opened up a shop, they might write the signage in Vietnamese, like modern Vietnamese letters, or they might use Chinese letters, depending on how traditional a shop they were. And then it becomes a lingua franca in the sense that a Chinese person driving through a Vietnamese neighborhood knows which one is like the fruit store, right? For Europeans, they might use French in this way. Like you might see a French bakery have a French bakery in Ireland might have a French sign, and a French bakery in Germany might have a French sign, and a French bakery in Italy might have a French sign because they're doing French bread. And people understand, okay, that's French. Whereas if you did a sausage shop, even if you did it in Spain, you might do the signage in German because the sausages are really good in Germany. So this Chinese characters, the fact that they're used by many different languages means that they can actually be used to communicate. And the part that's used the most is the oldest part of Chinese, which is the most likely to be common among all of them. This was an explicit part of my education at university, but I've actually really found it to be true. Like the entrances and exits on the doors, any country in Asia, they're going to use the same characters for entrance and exits on the doors, right? For example. So learning those things can be really, really handy, even if you're not necessarily in Japan, like other parts of Asia. Now, you know, in the People's Republic of China, they use like a new forms, supposed to be simplified forms of Chinese characters. In Taiwan, they use older forms. Japanese is kind of splitting the difference. But having a knowledge of it, having a base knowledge of it, you can then build your knowledge for the rest of your life. And those are the main points I want to tell about today's exercise. Please look at hiragana, become comfortable with them. Please look at katakana, become comfortable with them. When you're looking at Japanese media, try and identify katakana and hiragana. And here's the thing, statistically, the number one character of all in Japanese is this character right here, no. And it was like the first character I learned of all. And if you search a Japanese text and it doesn't have this character, it is not a Japanese text. So if you're looking at a text and it might be Chinese or it might be something else, Mandarin or Cantonese, you're not sure, search for this character, no. If you don't find it, it's not Japanese. If you're searching for this character, hiragana, and all the results come up in Chinese, if you put the character no next to hiragana, suddenly the results will start coming up in Japanese. Unless it's specifically Chinese people studying Japanese. But that no is the most common Japanese character, and if it's in a document, it will be a Japanese document. And if it's not in the document, it will not be a Japanese document. It's a syllable. It's a part of other words. If it's a piece of grammar, it means the same as apostrophe S in English, or of. So Shannon of Cork, or Cork apostrophe S Shannon would be Cork no Shannon, for example. Really crazy example, but as grammatical function, it means apostrophe S. It means one thing belongs to another thing, and it's common within any Japanese document. So this will be our first video. I need feedback from you in how to shape the next video. Thank you for your time. それではまたそのうちにお学びしましょう。